Welcome back to Normal Island Live. My name is Lewis Aaron. I am very sorry for how late we are. I take full responsibility. We do all work full time here while doing turn left, so sometimes things get a little bit behind. It does seem to be happening more often with me, so I am sorry. But we have some stories for you today that range from interesting to bizarre to tragic and concerning. 12 people have died crossing the English Channel yesterday, including 6 children and a pregnant woman. Sources from the Israeli newspaper Haaretz claim that the ICC may announce very soon their decision on the arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and of course the Hamas leaders too. A report from the Grenfell Tower disaster was released today. 72 people died in that disaster. It took 7 years to complete the inquiry, and still, we might not see any charges for another 2 or 3 years. Priti Patel has been knocked out of the Tory leadership race. But before we get to those, let's introduce our guest today, Sarah Dallal. Hello.
Hello. How are we? How are you?
Oh, I'm all right, got a little bit behind getting everything ready
No,
for
but
the
like you
show.
said, you work full time, so you can't blame yourself. So do I, by the way. I do also work full time. Thank you for having me again.
Yeah. Well, over the last few weeks when we've been doing some lives together, which by the way, everyone should go to Sarah's TikTok and go follow her lives that she does, because, she's had some free time recently in between her job. She's been reminding everyone every single day that she does in fact have a job.
I do work. Because they use it as they weaponize it against me, like, "Go get a job," and I'm like, "I do have one. I'm just on summer holidays." So, yeah.
Right, we will move on to our first story. So, yesterday, around 70 asylum seekers were placed on a boat, a small and unsafe boat, off the coast of France. They were desperate to start a new life. Only 8 of them had life jackets after the overcrowded boat departed. It fell apart in French waters, killing 6 children and a pregnant woman. Now, if you listen to the likes of Nigel Farage, he may, have convinced you that only military-aged men are crossing the channel, coming to simultaneously steal your jobs and also claim benefits and not work. But since January this year, we now have 226 people who have died crossing the channel, including 35 children. People might scream they've passed through safe countries to get here, but put yourself in their shoes for a second. I'm going to try and paint a picture and maybe have a little bit of a rant, because the majority of the people who died were from Eritrea. Eritrea is ran by an absolute dictator. There's been no elections in 30 years. There are no legislators, no independent civil society organizations or media outlets, and no independent judiciary at all. Reports from multiple human rights organizations have reported that Eritreans are subject to forced labor, indefinite military conscription for men and women, and people who are conscripted are often subjected to inhumane and degrading punishment, including torture, without any form of recourse. So, of course, people are going to flee, right? But where are they going to go? Well, 20,000 of them went to their neighboring country, as most refugees and asylum seekers do. They went to the Tigray region of northern Ethiopia. So they must be safe now, right? No, they weren't. They were not safe, because there was a civil war in that region, and the UN Refugee Agency were unable to access that refugee camp for months. So when they finally returned, we found that, this is from, the sources. My camera's just gone a bit weird. Apologies, tech problems. Okay, we're good. So when they finally returned, we found that both camps completely destroyed and deserted of refugees, and all facilities looted and vandalized. Some 7,600 refugees, about 38% of those are known to be residing in the camps, and they remain unaccounted for. And this was the refugee camp that they were staying in Ethiopia. They couldn't access it for months, the UN Refugee Agency. And then when they returned to it, that is what they found. So where else can these people now go? So when they arrive in Europe, because they have to move north, they have to compete with millions of other refugees and asylum seekers. They don't want to go to a refugee camp with their 3 kids after what they just went through. They're going to do whatever they can to get to their family to a safe and stable place. So where they want their kids to go to school and have a life, not sit in a refugee camp for decades. Does anybody honestly blame them for trying? So they hedge their bets, and some go to Germany, some go to France, and of course some come to the UK. So this idea that they've already been to a safe country, they've gone through a safe country, is an absolute fallacy, because they're competing against millions of people per year across multiple countries. You can't really blame them for paying a human trafficker to get them on a boat so their kids might actually, have a better life. So if we just, opened up some safe routes, those 6 children, the pregnant woman, and maybe her baby, and 226 other people this year alone, maybe they could still be alive. So I'm just fed up of this at the moment. Sarah, I know I ranted quite a bit there, but what is your
Yeah.
thoughts on all?
I mean, the rant is welcomed. I think you know where I stand when it comes to this. I think, well, I've been in campaign groups where we've long argued for this, the need, and I guess how imminent it is to have safe and legal routes to European countries as a whole. When I think about, and I'm thinking about the UK here, but we don't have, and I know this was not to do with the UK, but when we think about people coming to the UK, the eligibility for refugee resettlement schemes and also like the family reunion schemes are so limited. It's almost inaccessible. So I think if the new government is trying to understand anything, what it needs to understand is how can we evaluate these existing routes, and how are they functioning currently at the moment, before drawing up any new policies.
Mm,
But I think we need to also really take into consideration that no one ever risks their life traveling across the sea or in these dangerous waters when the land that they exist in is no safer. I think it says a lot. When the waters are safer than the land you exist in, then there's a real issue there. We need to put preventative measures in place so that people don't feel like they need to take these dangerous journeys to reach certain countries, or to seek some sort of refuge or asylum from the countries that they exist in. But also, I think we need to start also we need to look at the truths as well, that currently we don't have safe and legal routes to many of these countries, particularly the UK. And I think we need to start reiterating and emphasising these truths that the government literally allows nobody to make a claim for asylum in the UK unless they are physically present in the UK, and that poses an issue. So how are we going to interrogate that? This long-standing government policy, I think, is something that's quite problematic, and that a lot of people do perpetuate these lies and these myths and misconceptions and weaponize stories like this to say we shouldn't have got on the boat in the first place. Well, maybe there should be a safe and legal route for people to access, so they can genuinely seek refuge and asylum from the countries that they reside in. So,
mm.
so
And what's
yeah.
frustrating as well is that people have this notion that once people do actually get here, that's it. They can just be like, "Oh, I'm being persecuted," or I've heard stories about the right-wing media saying people pretend to be
Mm,
gay, or they just make things up to get into the country. It's not as simple as that. They reject, I think it's something along the lines of around 30 or 40% of applications, because
mm,
there is actually a high bar to pass. You can't just be like, "Oh, I'm being persecuted. Let me in. Let me stay." It does not work like that.
exactly.
And this is why we need safe routes. Obviously, if applications are denied, that maybe proves that people might try and come here for purposes that might they might not actually need to be here. They might have not come from a unsafe country or along those lines. But obviously, a lot of them do. And
Mm,
to prevent 40% of people getting rejected when they try to get here, when they risk their life to get here, we could just process them overseas. And I'm not talking about like
literally.
a Rwanda style thing.
Mm,
I think at one point there was an offer on the table with France, right, where we could process people on the other side of the border, but the government said no to that.
mm,
And it is just very frustrating. And
it
there's
is.
also other countries who do applications before they get to the country, and there's no evidence that suddenly everybody's going to be like, oh, we're going to apply to the UK now, because you don't actually
Mm.
have to be there to claim asylum. It's just simply not true.
Exactly. And I think we also need to emphasize the fact that seeking asylum from any sort of persecution is lawful. Like, that is the fundamental basis of it all. Refugees
Yeah.
don't need anyone's permission to do so. And I think that shouldn't be too hard to understand, that the Refugee Convention, which we are under, does give that right to everyone. And I think they literally say like, and I quote, to seek and to continue something, to enjoy in other,
Mm.
to seek and enjoy in other countries, something along those lines. Um, so why are we so resistant to that fact, or why are some people so resistant to that fact? And when I think, I know I keep coming back to the UK, but the UK's only actually ever currently got a safe and legal route for those that come from Ukraine. And I
Yeah.
feel like there, and maybe people might call me a bit of a conspiracist, but I think there is, and this might be a bit of an outlandish claim, that this might have some underlying racialized tones to it, some sort of xenophobia, but maybe that's something that people won't be akin to. But that's how I'm viewing it at the moment. I think it's a government choice to require refugees wishing to seek asylum in the UK to rely on dangerous journeys. And I think that's a conscious decision that they make every single day when we're seeing the lives of people be lost trying to
And
seek
if
some refuge.
I want to go back to the idea of dehumanization as well, because
Mm,
obviously these people are massively dehumanized in lots of ways, and it goes back to that idea of military aged men. The Daily Mail maybe
yeah.
putting on the front of their newspaper one Syrian guy holding an iPhone, and it's like, look, they've got an iPhone. They don't need help if they can afford an iPhone.
Mm,
They obviously don't need help. Even though just I think it was yesterday, Nadeem Zahawi was being interviewed on the News Agents, and he was talking about that he came from actually quite a rich family in,
mm,
I think it was Iraq, and they still needed asylum. Like his family still got persecuted. Like there are rich people and middle class people in
exactly.
countries which might be overall poorer countries, but
Mm,
yeah, some of them can afford iPhones.
absolutely.
Syria had a middle class before the war. Like they had lots of people who owned businesses and did well for themselves, and they could afford
Mm,
iPhones.
yes.
And the constant dehumanization of this idea of like, oh, the Daily Mail or the other newspapers will take pictures of like certain brands of clothing that they're wearing. They'll purposely put a picture of like one of the boats that arrive in a week, that the one that just happens to be full of men, and then forget
Mm,
about 30% of them contain women and children as well, just like this boat. And again, going back to the amount of people who've lost their lives just this year, what was it, 226?
yeah.
And it's over 10% of the deaths are children. So we need to scrub away this idea of like military aged men, economic migrants who are just coming here when they don't
Mm,
need to. It's just a constant dehumanization, with going back to what you said, that undertone of like racism as well, because it's easier to dehumanize people who are, let's just say, a bit pigmented with a bit of melanation in their
absolutely.
skin. It's just easier for people to
Agreed.
do that.
Yeah, absolutely. That racialization does continue even with the verbiage that many people use when they try to have conversations around migration. Like the whole idea that, like you said, these military men, why are they all men and why are they all boys coming into this country? And I can't stand the term third world. I think
Yeah.
it's like the third world, and it's like, okay, so we as the West are here, this incredible set of countries who just all got it together, and then third world are just these, yeah, like you said, pigmented individuals who face these atrocities every day, and then government failures every single day. But like you said, a lot of these countries did have middle classes. A lot of these countries did have class systems that we faced, and would critique the government the same way that we could, in a lot in some places. But unfortunately, people don't want to view it that way. So yeah, and I really am of the belief, and I will advocate for this loud and proudly, that I think we have a legal duty here to cater to people who are trying to seek refuge. It's absolutely unacceptable and abhorrent, and it's heinous to think that there are
Hmm.
six children. Is it six children and a pregnant woman have
Yeah.
died trying to cross some waters? Like, I think that should send chills up anyone's spine. And I think if anyone's going to really have a nuanced conversation around migration, really look into the truths and stop spreading misinformation around it, because I think way too many lives are being lost now at this point as a result of not having safe and legal routes.
Yeah, and on top of that, there's a life in there that will never be, and that's the baby that was inside
Exactly.
the pregnant woman. Um,
Exactly.
like, I'm glad that obviously this made headlines, but I'm not glad that has to be in the headlines. But it's
Mm,
just frustrating how I think people just see it, and then I think most people were at a point where people are just like, "Oh, that's sad," and it just kind of ends there for a lot of
yeah.
people. And it continues to be frustrating because more people
Mm,
are just going to die, and more people are just going to lose their lives.
exactly.
We will move on to our second story. Priti Patel is out of the Tory leadership race with Robert Jenrick on top. Let's have a little look at the results.
Results in alphabetical order. Kemi Badenoch, 22 votes. James Cleverly, 21 votes. Robert Jenrick, 28 votes. Priti Patel, 14 votes. Mel Stride, 16 votes. And Tom Tugendhat, 17 votes. So as a result of the ballot, Priti Patel is eliminated from the contest, and there'll be a further ballot next Tuesday to reduce the list from 5 to 4 candidates.
So goodbye, Priti Patel. I actually thought she might have done, I don't know, a bit better. You know, she's been in the government for years. I kind of thought she had a bit more standing, but I guess not. I really loved Priti Patel's campaign poster she posted just before the vote on social media. I really love how she mentions Labour is anti-business, because Priti Patel is so pro-business that when she worked for a lobbying and PR firm before becoming an MP, she worked with British Tobacco, where she lobbied MEPs against tobacco regulation, helped defend the image of British Tobacco when it was revealed a factory they owned in Burma was jointly owned by their military dictatorship, which is one of the most deadly in the world. British Tobacco paid the military generals around $16 million between 1993 and 2002. And then she also defended British Tobacco when it was revealed children as young as 7 were working in their factories in Nigeria. That's how pro-business Priti Patel is. We've got Robert Jenrick in first place, who very famously walked into a children's migrant centre, saw a cartoon mural of Mickey Mouse and said the murals were too welcoming and had them painted over. That story just speaks for itself. In second place, we've got culture war Kemi Badenoch, who recently attacked the government for means testing the winter fuel allowance and then called them dishonest. But then the Telegraph reminded us of this moment.
There's a lot of dead weight in how we run government. I have people in my constituency telling me that they don't need the winter fuel payments that we give them because they can afford it. Why do we not have a more sophisticated mechanism for means testing? Those are the sort of long-term things which government should be doing, which we haven't been doing because we're focusing always on the short term, on the news headlines for tomorrow. So what I'm not going to do is give headlines for tomorrow. I'm talking about system change.
That was a clip that the Telegraph resurfaced from Kemi Badenoch's last prime ministerial campaign. I love it when these clips just crop up out of nowhere. In third place, we have James Cleverly. He hasn't really had any exceptional scandals, I don't think. He's quite the average, boring, slightly more centrist Tory who's all about uniting, but at least along with Kemi Badenoch, he doesn't actually believe in leaving the ECHR, which actually surprised me. I thought Kemi would be, championing in that. But unlike the other candidates, they all want to leave the ECHR, and they're trying to make it their unique selling point, but they're all trying to sell it. Fourth and fifth places, Mel Stride and Tom Tugendhat. Maybe if they get a little bit higher on the list, we can chat more about them. But right now, I think they're a little bit insignificant. We'll have to see what happens at next week's vote on Tuesday to see who else comes out on top. Sarah, would you like to make a prediction? Who's going to win?
It's so hard to tell. I mean, it's hard to believe though, because do the Tories feel like that their leadership, the leadership of their party, is a prize worth having? I mean, I don't know if it is, to be honest. But I mean, I think it's you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. Become a leader of that party. I think you're headed for insignificance either way. It's hard. I don't know. It's possible. I was expecting that Priti Patel was going to do relatively well, given that she does have, like you said, she is so business minded. But I honestly could be Kemi, could be possibly, but it's hard to say. I don't know if I would be able to make a prediction into the Tory party. I don't know if I'm invested in the Tory party as much as I should be. But I guess we'll have to see. Maybe Shapster will be in for a chance, but I think difficult for me to predict.
I'm trying to think. I really don't know who it's going to come down to. I know Kemi is quite popular,
He is quite
but
popular.
I don't know. Maybe they'll just settle on like more of the centrist types, like a Tom Tugendhat or a James Cleverly.
Quite
When
possibly
it was,
James Cleverly.
what was that? Sorry.
Quite possibly it could be James Cleverly. I mean, he has been making
Yeah,
quite a few appearances, particularly when he was in Sunak's cabinet and stuff. But is he someone that could be trusted? He hasn't really had any mishaps that I think are worth noting or holding him to account for, that I think are heinous enough to be like, James, I don't think any Tory supporter won't trust you. But yeah, I
I
don't
think I
I don't
think he
know.
kind of represents too much of the previous government, whereas I feel like Kemi was able to separate herself so much from Rishi Sunak that she's not necessarily associated with like Rishi Sunak, but I think James
Mm,
is, and the rest of them as well. Obviously, Pretty's gone now, but with Tom Tugendhat, with Mel Stride, is there another one? I can't remember all their names now. That I don't think they
Grant
have that
Shapps.
almost like. Sorry, I don't think Graham Shapps was on that list, was he? It's getting
Oh, is
late.
he
I
not?
don't
Maybe
think he
not
was on that
actually.
list.
Yeah,
But
I think it's very close.
ultimately, I feel like at least all of them besides James probably has like the
Mm,
least association with the previous government. So I really don't know. When it was the last leadership competition, I kind of thought I actually somewhat liked a little bit Tom Tugendhat because he kind of represented that kind of Cameron era Tory, where obviously there were still
mm,
many bad eggs. But if you compare, the Cameron government then to what we ended up with towards the end of Rishi Sunak, it's not the same party. But when he was running for
mm,
leadership, he then started throwing trans people under the bus. And then now, Tom was known as like the more kind of centrist, old school, early Cameron Tory. And now he's like, oh, we're going to leave the ECHR. I want to leave the ECHR. When only in 2022, he was like, no, it would destabilize the country. It would be
it's
ridiculous. We'd have to
interesting, yeah.
rework the Windsor framework. We'd have to rework the Good Friday Agreement, which are all true. But now, because
Mm,
he just wants power, he's like, oh, ECHR, goodbye.
mm. So do you actually think he's got what it takes to rebuild the party, given that he's changed his tune so often? Well,
I
not
don't
so
know. He
often,
has
but changed his tune quite significantly.
on paper, like maybe I listen too much to American politics where everything's about like people and their military backgrounds, but he has a very strong military background, right? And I feel like if he leverages that maybe a little bit
Mm,
more, he could appeal to certain types of voters because he's got an impressive military record. He's got amazing knowledge on foreign policy. His dad was like I think like a senior judge. Like he's got like an impressive background. So if he leverages that a lot more,
mm,
maybe I don't know. A lot of people are saying that the Tory base are too racist to let in somebody like Kemi Badenoch. On top of that, she's a woman, which,
mm.
yeah, the Tory party have given us 3 women prime ministers so far, which is way more than Labour have. But at the same time, we
Such
also
an
know that
epidemic.
misogyny still is an issue, regardless of the fact that the Conservatives have given us 3 female prime ministers. Misogyny is still an issue, and just racism as well. So can she overcome
Absolutely.
those barriers? I don't know.
Well,
Uh,
I don't know if she'll. I mean, I doubt Kemi quite a bit, but I think she's gotten away with saying and doing what I think is quite. She's quite minimal, I think, in nature, and I think she does that
yeah,
on purpose, so she isn't held to account on what some other political individuals might be held to account for when they say problematic things. But I do find her to be a bit of a mumbler, and I think that she will face quite a few challenges. I mean, any person who holds a position of power, particularly if you're a woman, I think you're under quite a considerable amount of scrutiny. And
yeah.
then throw that you're black into the mix, it will mean that you are looked at through a different sort of lens. But the same could be said for James Cleverly. Cleverly, I think, not an aptronym for who he is as a person. I don't know if I can trust him enough, like I said, but it's one of those things where we just have to see. But yeah, I don't trust that party at all whatsoever, given that we've had 14 years under them. And I still am of the essence that is this truly a prize to be had? Is it really a worthy prize, given that you don't have much I mean, such a loss given the general election that they've just had. So I don't know.
Yeah, and on
They've
top of
got a
that as
lot of
well,
reshaping to do.
like history tells us in theory that if you're going to be taking over as the leader of any party after you've just lost, after being in power for a period of time, you're probably not going to be the next prime minister anyway, because leaders just simply don't last that long. After I've literally forgotten his name, the prime minister after Margaret Thatcher. Oh my God, why have I forgotten his name? White hair. Wow, I shouldn't be doing politics shows if I can't even remember the name of the prime minister before Tony
Stop.
Blair. Oh my God, I'm gone blank. Anyway, there was multiple Tory leaders after him between Cameron, because after every few
John
years they just tried
Major.
to. John Major, thank you very much.
You're
I'm
welcome.
gonna just leave now. They had multiple leaders in between John Major getting defeated and David Cameron coming to power. Some of them only lasted like 2 years, because when you're in the opposition, they get fed up of them because they don't get any traction. So I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens. I'm kind of glad
Yeah.
Priti Patel's out of it. For me, I
So
was
am
most
I.
scared of Priti Patel, but now I think I am.
I'm
Oh,
frightened
go
of
ahead. Sorry.
her. I'm sorry, I'm frightened of her. I've been frightened of her ever since she was Home Secretary, secretary, and I was just like, I don't think I could stomach the idea of having Priti Patel have that sort of power or have that sort of say in Parliament. And it comes back to, and sorry, this goes back to the previous story, but it comes back to that the whole safe and legal routes. She had done so many things and said so many things that I felt was so despicable, that having her out of that race brought ease to my heart, because it meant that she will not inflict as much harm as she did when she was Home Secretary. She's to me, she's a frightening woman, and I'll never forget the death of the 16-year-old Sudanese boy who I don't remember his name, but they'd found his body had washed up onto the waters, and it was because of her policies, her attitude, I think, to migration, and I feel like that attitude of hers will persist if she was to still be in the race. So I do veer on the side of caution when it comes to her. So
And you know what? I'll just throw it out there, even though it's not necessarily relevant. But I like to remind people that Priti Patel had to resign from government, I think, in 2017, because she was secretly meeting with Israeli officials, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, multiple times behind the back of the government, the Prime Minister, and the Foreign Office. None of them knew. And in the context of the idea of Israeli influence and lobbying within our government and within other governments, I feel like the context of that is really important, because it shows, she's obviously under the form of influence, and it's not tying into ridiculous conspiracy theories, because I hate all of that stuff and I decry it constantly. But we do know that there is influence there, and that's part of the reason why I've always been afraid of a Priti Patel coming into power, because what that would maybe mean for Israel, Gaza, West Bank, and all those issues too. But we will move on to the next part, which is. Oh, I had a little delay then. We now have multiple people working for Turn Left, but it is all voluntary still. Nobody's getting paid. Any income that we make is just getting reinvested right straight back into Turn Left. But in order for us to dedicate more time to Turn Left, to upgrade the quality, maybe get me here on time so I can start the show on time, and to become a fully realized media organization, you can support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 a month at patreon.com/Turn Left Media. But if you can't, that's fine. We're glad that you're here, of course, but please subscribe, comment, like, all the usual stuff, share, and please make sure you follow us on all social media channels. Right. Do we have any comments to look at? Do we have some comments? Welcome back.
Thank you.
So I'm so sick of having this conversation on any basis other than it being a legal duty for us to process their claims. We are breaking international law. Sarah?
I completely agree. And this actually goes back to something I said. I think I literally said the words legal duty. I think we have a legal duty to cater to those who are seeking refuge, who are seeking asylum from lands that are deemed as unsafe. And I think sometimes it just takes empathy and humanity to understand the magnitude of pain and suffering these people are enduring. So I completely agree with this comment. I do think that we do breach international law, or just any sort of humanity, when we don't try to create safer and legal routes for people to to seek refuge. Simple as. There's no
Yeah.
two about it. I get so passionate about it, and I do go on a rant, Lewis, like worse than yours, I reckon, where I start fumbling, and I'm like, how can people not not see it for what it is? Like, people are dying. Make it
I
make
think
sense.
I think as well. I was speaking to somebody yesterday about the AfD and their far right win in Germany just this
Yes.
week, and we were talking about how do the left at this point, with the rise of the right and the far right. We've got Meloni in Italy. We've got Le Pen, who almost won the elections. We've got everything that's happening in Germany. We've got the Netherlands, other long list of countries that are having these far right rises over the last few years, and it's very scary. So do the left wing only have one choice, but to eventually just become still quote unquote left, but anti-immigrant, because they don't seem to be able to win this battle, because nobody wants to have an honest conversation about immigration and asylum seekers, that not only can we provide them with a place to be safe, that if you look all across Europe, we still have lots of job vacancies. Even if we gave every single asylum seeker in this country right now, every single one, a job, it would cover 5 to 10% of the vacancies that we have in this country right now. And obviously, they're not all qualified, but hey ho, why don't we make use of the skills that they have? Maybe help them integrate into the country even further by letting them work, by helping them with some skills and utilizing them. But because nobody wants to have an honest conversation like this, because they'd be dragged through the right-wing media, the left have no other option but to become anti-immigrant at this point. And I think we're going to start to see that happening. Well, we saw it happen with Labour. Remember, right before the election, demonizing Bangladeshis.
We did. I mean, why do you think the right are dominating so much in the political spectrum, particularly across other European countries? Is it because they're successfully capitalizing on the social resentment that people are harboring, or is it because people just genuinely fear the unknown? Like, why do you think that they're, I guess, dominating the narrative slightly and actually winning?
I'll start from the top, and our other lovely host and founder of Turn Left will be very happy with this comment, but capitalism is absolutely failing. It completely is, especially obviously in the West, right? So we've got to a point now where house prices are extortionate. The cost of materials, the cost of living for everyone is just insane. Most countries, I think actually every single Western country, is not being able to keep up with the demand for houses. We have skills gaps. We have global shortages of nurses, of doctors, and all of our systems are failing across all these countries. And the answer isn't blaming migrants, but because the right can find a very simple answer that aligns with their ideology and gets them into power, they just blame it all on immigrants, when in actual fact we all know that most of the problems that we have are nothing to do with immigration, nothing to do with refugees or asylum seekers. It's the way we've structured our countries, the way we've structured this capitalist system, the way we have absolutely failed to distribute wealth fairly, to tax the rich, to make sure they don't have all of these loopholes to keep rich, right? And that's what's failing, and that's how the right can then come in and be like, immigrants, they're the fault for everything, blame them, give me power, I'll fix it.
It's just such an easy scapegoat, isn't it? Such an easy scapegoat. Sorry, another comment popped up, but I do think it's a baseless and senseless claim, I think, to focus solely on immigration, how it's impacting us. And I think actually, if people really wanted to interrogate it, it is, I think, to put it simply, capitalizing on social resentment as well. People feeling like undeserving people are taking things from them. Why? Don't let them take these
obviously,
things.
we've done so many lives together where we have discussions with people from all across the spectrum, and how many times do we have to say it's okay to talk about immigration, it's okay to talk about the security of this country, it's okay to ask these questions, nobody's going to call you racist, but they're living in this world where they think that by asking these questions that the left are going to call them racist, and then it just goes back and forth into this stupid circular argument. It's okay to ask these questions, but when you come to us and have these conversations and you're clearly misinformed, then you're just simply voting for something that you just don't understand. So sorry, we'll move on to the
no, we will move on, because I could talk about this all day.
I know. I feel like I'm on a live discussion panel with you all over again. The MSM's language over this is disgusting. These people are refugees arriving by irregular methods, not illegal immigrants. That is absolutely correct, Edward. The MSM are complicit in racism by doing it too. Yeah. absolutely. The term illegal migration is thrown around so much, and this actually ties back into the point that I just made about how people are simply misinformed. They don't understand the status of these people, the legality of them being allowed to do what they could do, and what they can do, and what they're entitled to when they get here. You know, it's everything from they're illegal migrants to they claim that they just get given a council house and they get given all these benefits, when it's so far from reality. It's very frustrating how uninformed these people are. Anything else on that comment,
I
Sarah?
completely agree. Yeah, I'll just say something
Um,
really quickly so I don't go off into any tangents, but I think absolutely that popular hostility towards immigrants is completely determined by this perceived big picture, and they're always getting that polling data wrong, and it's always being perceived wrong. People, I don't think those errors are actually neutral. I think they are rooted in this aim to have people focus on the wrong things. And I don't think it's hard to see how that's not prejudiced. It's hard to see how that's not prejudiced.
Was there another comment then? I think there was. Jacqueline, it's human instinct to go where you're familiar with the language, and or you might have family or friends in a particular country. Yeah, that's absolutely true, because obviously, you know, the British spent so much time colonizing many parts of the world. There are links to a lot of the countries that we get asylum seekers from. There are also links to a lot of countries that we've destabilized over the last few decades. And on top of that, because English is the lingua franca, not just because of the British Empire, but because of the dominance of America, so many people speak English. So if I'm a refugee, I'm coming from Eritrea, and I, you know, may speak English more than any other language as a second language. Where am I going to set my sights? I'm not going to go to Australia. I'm not going to go to America. I'm going to go to the UK, because that's the easiest place that I'm going to be able to integrate and find a job. And it's just as simple as that. And again, you'll actually see the data from the former African countries who were colonized by the French, that they go to France. That's the way it works a lot of the time. We don't get many people coming on boats who are, you know, French-speaking asylum seekers, because they want to go to France because that's their language. Anything else on that, Sarah?
Absolutely. No, I completely agree with you. Like, they're just perpetuating again this misinformation, and I think that this proliferation of fear mongering that I'm seeing so often be shown online in these articles, in mainstream articles as well. Like, I mean, some of the worst ones that I don't ever read, but I do read just so that I'm informed about what some individuals do read on a daily basis. It's the rhetoric. It's harmful, but I do look into like how this development of neoliberalism, I think particularly in the UK, is that I think it goes hand in hand with the Britishness of like politics, the politics of Britishness, sorry. This whole, like, when I think about Thatcher shutting off immigrants, and that was being like, that was the central idea behind her agenda of like to make the pound stronger, or the Falklands fever. And then also I think Labour actually with the competition state. So I think it's all been part of this Britishness agenda that has been perpetuated for a while, and I think it's kind of embarked on this on an offense. Like, hello, we need to be against, you know, multiculturalism. It's failed quite considerably in this country, and also let's look at non-EU immigration. It's just pointing fingers in the wrong direction. Immigrants have been continuously pointed at and identified as these like undeserving leeches who are taking these scarce resources from us, and that's further from the truth. They are not a security menace, and they're not an existential threat to British values, but that is the target of the resentment. So
Yeah,
I can
and
see
we
how
know
certain
we know
right-wing
from the
media do
data that. Oh, sorry, I cut you off.
No, it's all good.
Oh, sorry. We know from the data that the crime rate isn't any higher amongst immigrant groups than it is with the what's the quote is native British population. I hate that word though, native. But that's the wording from the that's the wording from the document that the lead immigration advisor from, I think it's one of the big fancy London universities, provided. And on top of that, the unemployment rate is lower. It's much lower in immigrant groups than it is for native Britons. And there's just actually no actual data that backs up anything that the people on the right actually say about immigration. It just simply does not exist. It's usually cherry picked and misrepresented.
Always.
Any more comments, or are we going on to the third story? 3, 2, one. Okay, we'll go on to the third story. We are talking. We are talking a lot, and we do have two more stories left to cover. So, the third story. So, the Israeli newspaper, Haaretz, am I pronouncing that right? I'm not sure. The Israeli newspaper, Haaretz, has cited sources within Israel's justice ministry that they believe the International Criminal Court will decide over the next few days on whether they will issue arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense minister, Yoav Gallant. The sources are cautiously optimistic, they say, that the court will decide against issuing the warrants. The officials said that the government's refusal to set up a state commission of inquiry to investigate the events of the war, as recommended by the Attorney General, along with the fact that Israel has been lagging in its own investigations of alleged war crimes, something that would preempt the ICC action. And it will strengthen the likelihood that the court will accept the Chief Prosecutor Karim Khan's request for the warrants. Nevertheless, they added, the court recently received 26 legal opinions supporting Israel from other countries, organizations, and academics, and this bolsters their chances that it will reject the warrants. The officials said that they expect the court to issue its decision within days, or at the most, some weeks. So, with this, I was reading it and I was a bit up and down. So, we can hope that Benjamin Netanyahu and his genocidal allies will get the arrest warrants issued to them by the court. But speaking of the genocide, speaking of the genocide and Benjamin Netanyahu, have you also seen this clip going viral? The quality of it is very poor. It was removed everywhere, and this is the only source that I could find.
If you gave me a button to just erase Gaza, every single living being in Gaza would no longer be living tomorrow, I would press it in a second. That's just, I think most Israelis
if that's
agree.
The choice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, even if it's not like right now.
Yeah, no.
I would press it right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the same with the territories.
I would press it right now.
Mm-hmm.
No choice.
No, I'm saying for the chance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would press it right now. Give me that button and press it right now.
There you go.
And I think most Israelis would.
Yeah. Most Jewish Israelis.
They wouldn't post, they wouldn't talk about it like I am.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't post, they wouldn't say I pressed it.
Yeah.
But they would.
They don't have balls of steel like you.
They would, but they would press it, right? Like if they were in a closet alone, they wouldn't even hesitate.
Mm-hmm.
Someone came to them and said, "No one will know. You press this, all the Palestinians are gone." You'd be like, "Fucking hey, is there another?"
So you might maybe think that that's a clip from Israel of two guys speaking, and they might just be, fringe characters, like a more Nigel Farage or just some, crazy right-wing extremists, but they're not. This was a clip from a video podcast called Two Nice Jewish Boys, and the hosts, Noah Mengiga, sorry, bad pronunciation, and Eitan Weinstein, one of whom actually worked for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud party for years. These aren't just fringe, crazy far-right people who just want to, just say, oh, let's just kill the Palestinians. This is something that I've sadly heard too many times, actually, from people from Israel. Too many clips. We have the heritage minister back in November saying that we should nuke Gaza. Very recently, we had Smotrich, the finance minister for Israel, saying that it would be moral and justifiable to starve Gazans. So this isn't new rhetoric, but still, every time you see it, it is still quite shocking. So they've since edited the clip to remove this moment, but I'm left wondering how calling for the genocide of 5 million Palestinians is not against YouTube terms and conditions and Spotify and, all the other places that they have a platform. It's pretty awful because they edited the clip, but the clip is still now out there. So I don't understand how these people can remain to be platformed after this. But, if you took that situation and replaced the word, Gazans or people living in the West Bank or Palestinians with the word Jew or Jewish, you would probably be immediately deplatformed and permanently banned from all social media. So why do they still have a platform? I don't know. Sarah, when I first read about the arrest warrants, I got a little bit upset because I almost read this as Haaretz reporting that they had a source in the ICC that they were not going to issue the arrest warrants. But then after I reread it, it's basically just saying they're cautiously optimistic, and it's actually not indicative of any actual result. So what are your thoughts?
I mean, this is going, I think, to make or break the ICC, like this case of Netanyahu, and that's how I view it. I think the ICC has long been under quite a bit of scrutiny, given the way that they've dealt with previous cases in the past. But this, I think, is a move that could really leave the ICC badly scorched if they don't do anything to alleviate the suffering of Gazans as Israel really continues its genocide. This is a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. It's killing thousands of civilians, just in crazy rates. So the way I view the ICC is I do look at them through this lens of skepticism because of their absolute failings in the past since 2002, since they've been established. But they could definitely be badly scorched with this. So I'm keeping a close eye on them. I am also cautiously optimistic, but can you actually remain optimistic with the ICC when they haven't fulfilled their obligations as much as they should have done? I don't think it takes any sort of genius to know that Netanyahu's grip on power is a get out of jail free card when he does the things that he does. Maybe I'm going too far, but that's how I view it. That is how I view it.
Yeah, what's also funny as well is that Karim Khan, he's a British prosecutor who was nominated by the Conservative government to be in that position. And if you actually look at his record, right, people will think, oh, Karim Khan is, of some sort of, Asian descent. He's got a very Muslim sounding name, which all those things are true. Yes, he's a Muslim. But guess what? If you actually look at his record, you will see that he has gone after multiple Islamic groups across the globe. He has no evidence of any bias against any groups of people. So people are trying to throw this idea out there as like, oh, the ICC is anti-Semitic, Karim Khan's anti-Semitic. We've had in the past, I talked about this on the show a few weeks ago, about how the previous Trump administration, they actually sanctioned the previous prosecutor. Just today, Karim Khan actually commented on something while he was in Japan, saying that he's receiving lots of threats from Israelis, from Russians as well, because obviously he's involved in the arrest warrants for Vladimir Putin and the other woman, I can't remember her name, who also has a Russian arrest warrant out for her. And it's just frustrating. This guy, if you actually look in his past, he knows his shit. He knows exactly what he's doing. So I'm just hoping that he's now done his job, that the ICC can then do theirs. Because if they turn around and say that they're not issuing arrest warrants, it is going to embolden like the more radical Israelis, right? Because many people have been calling it a genocide for months. And if they turn around and say that what they've done isn't war crimes, or there's not enough evidence for war crimes, it's going to kind of flatten the pro-Palestinian movement in a way, because every time they scream genocide, every time we scream genocide, every time we scream, war crimes, humanitarian issues, that we've got less of a leg to stand on. So a lot is riding on these arrest warrants. And again, it ties back into Russia, because we can't say that the arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin is justified and completely legal if we can't hold another country accountable who happens to be our ally, right? And let's say they even do issue the arrest warrants. How can any of us then navigate a relationship with that government in any form? Because I have a very, very bad feeling that if they do issue the arrest warrants, that we're still going to continue these defensive licenses, right? That we're still selling to Israel. That countries, maybe there'll be, some more countries turning their back a bit, saying, "Oh, we're not going to sell you this, we're not going to sell you that." But I'm just scared that so much is resting on this. But I'm also scared that it's still not going to change anything, right?
Absolutely. Like you said, though, you did mention Khan, and that was someone that I was reading into today, actually. He is obviously this who does seem quite not bias. I think his pursuit of indictments and these warrants, and like you said, first for Putin and now for Israeli and Hamas leaders, I think it's a bold display of legal rule, and I don't disagree with it. I do want to look at Putin just for a second. I think we can't undermine, I think, the impacts of Russian imperialism, how that's continued throughout histories, like throughout the histories. Like it's brutal. And when we really read into it, it's like, does this actually shape the infrastructure of Russia as a whole? Is this what it's looked like for decades and centuries? Absolutely, it has. I'm not going to lie, and I think it's something that isn't spoken about as much as it should be. But I think Khan's got some spirited judicial idealism as an ICC prosecutor who isn't only targeting like the legal transgressions in Africa, but I think he is showing a very, very non-biased perspective. But again, I have to really really read this closely as it develops more, because this cautious optimism isn't enough for me to say, okay, I feel assured in the fact that the ICC is going to hold Netanyahu to account, and that I will feel assured that actually Gazans won't be suffering at the expenses that they're suffering at. So yeah, I'm going to be looking at it through a lens of complete criticism, because can any opposition turn this mass discontent into political power? I'm not sure. We'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we want to, the history of Russia and Ukraine and Israel and Palestine is completely different. But put that aside, let's put the parallels together and tie it in with the ICC. Is that Putin is, it's imperialism what he's trying to do. He wants to, take back Ukraine, and we all know that he basically wants to bring back all the Soviet territories, right? So because of his actions, we issued an ICC arrest warrant for him because he was so obviously guilty. So now a lot of people will use the term colonial when it comes to Gaza, West Bank, and East Jerusalem, which technically are true. But if their ultimate goal is to completely own that land and ethnically cleanse those people, that is then imperialist, right? So how can we turn around and say that Vladimir Putin, under international law that we helped create and that we're signed up to, absolutely deserves his arrest warrant, but then a state which has illegally occupied Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem illegally for, 50 years, since 1967, who just very recently had an ICJ ruling against them, saying that what they're doing is akin to apartheid, that their policies are illegal under so many levels of international law, but then turn around and not give those leaders in Israel the same justice. I don't know. It would be such a level of hypocrisy, and it will dilute any international law that we can throw to say how much better we are than Vladimir Putin, right? So anyway, I could rant about this all day, but we are running out of time.
I completely agree with you.
We will have to move on to the next story, just because I could talk about all these topics for hours, but we have limited time. We will move on to our last story, which is the Grenfell Tower Inquiry. It was released in its final report today. Let's just quickly watch this very short clip of Sir Martin Morbick, the chair of the inquiry.
The simple truth is that the deaths that occurred were all avoidable, and those who lived in the tower were badly failed over a number of years and in a number of different ways by those who were responsible for ensuring the safety of the building and its occupants. The failings can be traced back over many years, and our efforts to get to the bottom of what went wrong and why account for the length of our report and the time it has taken us to produce it. However, if an inquiry of this kind is to produce anything of value, it is necessary for those who can influence the future direction of the construction industry, the fire and rescue services, the management of fire safety in buildings, and resilience planning to understand exactly where mistakes were made and how they can be avoided in the future.
I guess I didn't edit off the end of that clip then, so apologies for that. So, as he said, all 72 deaths were completely avoidable. This took 7 years to complete, which is an absolute joke to the victims and the families. I don't think we should go into the exact details of the report because it's just so incredibly long. I think it's 1,700 pages, but it provides multiple claims about companies who lied and misled people about their cladding, about their insulation products, which led to all of these deaths. So what we do need to know is that the blame has been placed across the board, from multiple governments to local authorities to private individuals and other companies as well. So 58 individuals actually, and 19 companies are being investigated by the police for potential charges, including corporate manslaughter, gross negligence manslaughter, never heard of that one, and fraud and misconduct of public office. But the police might take up to 2 years to investigate these. So seemed like a bit too long, doesn't it? Especially the fact that they've waited so long for this. The families are obviously not happy, and the police and the Crown Prosecution Service are now under pressure to accelerate these investigations, as families have had to wait 7 years already. And now they're being told that we may not even have any charges until 2026. So almost 10 years after the incident. Sarah, what do you make of all of this?
Well, it's an absolute spit in the face, isn't it, that it's taking this long to come to any sort of conclusion about where to place the blame, when it actually is across the board. And I remember reading this in 2019 with the Grenfell Tower Inquiry, and it was saying something about, well, hindsight provides no answer to the significant systemic and organizational failures that have taken place, or operational failings that have taken place. There are so many issues across the board when it comes to this, that it's impacting a certain group of people who come from a certain class, who are in a certain type of housing that was not built to have that sort of cladding, or built on any operational level. And I think it's important, obviously, to recognise the bravery and commitment that was had, and the duty that was shown by the firefighters. However, we can't mask or excuse any of the deficiencies when it comes to the command and the conduct of operations, particularly when it came to that incident. These were deaths that were certainly avoidable, but unfortunately, the whole thing around command and control and communication was an absolute failure. The way that the housing was built, failure. All of these people lining their pockets in the background, a failure. So many people failed as a result of this. There was no operational plan, no dynamic risk assessment, no need to assess any sort of additional resources. It was probably the most abhorrent thing that happened in my lifetime, when I was actually quite young. And I remember it happening and my heart just breaking. And then to think that my life has changed so significantly since that story, and yet the victims' lives haven't changed at all, and the survivors of that, because this inquiry has taken so long, and because there really is no justice yet, as a whole.
Yeah, and that building still stands there, burnt out, with a big cover on it. So anybody who still lives local still has to see that every single day for miles. And then on top of that as well, I don't want to obviously take away from the victims of the event, but even the after effects were completely astronomical, right? When we think about, it sounds like I'm talking about economic effects, but I'm not. I'm talking about individuals who've had their lives actually ruined, because once they passed that law saying that the type of cladding was illegal, the people couldn't sell their homes, right? We've still got thousands and thousands of people who cannot sell their homes. They're stuck. Their home is worth nothing. And we have thousands of, I think it was tens of thousands of people around the country whose landlords turned around to them and said, "Oh, I've been told that because I own this building and there's 100 buildings in here, we all have to pay 20 grand to get all the cladding replaced. So I'm putting your rent up by hundreds of pounds." That actually happened to one of the buildings that I lived in Manchester just 2 years ago, and it's awful. It's disruptive as well. They're at your building for months. It ruins everything. So when we add up everything that has happened that is connected to this, if this turns out to be one of those situations where those company executives manage to somehow get away with it, or they get some light charges, I just don't think people will take it, right? We've seen so many rich people, billionaires, millionaires, executives just manage to walk away from things. I know it's completely unrelated, but even case like Bill Cosby, right? Like we all know he did it, but he got off on a technicality. There's so many examples of these people who have money, who have power, of just getting away with this. And if in 2 years' time they finally do the first charge, and then we have to watch it go through courts for years, because we're talking about maybe this ending sometime around the 2030s, early 2030s, perhaps. If they get away with it, I just don't think people are going to stand for it, right? Think about Hillsborough and how long that affected the minds of the people who were related to that, not only through the event, but geographically. That is something that's entrenched in people. Unlike COVID with that inquiry, I think we all kind of just want to forget about COVID. But with these inquiries, with it, when it comes to Grenfell, it's not going to go away, and it's there, burned in the minds, especially of Londoners.
Absolutely.
And if they get away with it,
I couldn't even imagine. But you actually brought up a really great point about the whole property system as a whole, and it actually doesn't work well for leaseholders in the slightest. Like there is actually no effective legal accountability for selling homes that are not fit to live in. And I think the only person with the power to really make buildings safe is the freeholder. But the leaseholders, the people living in these blocks and in these high-story buildings, they can't force the freeholders to make the building safe. It's public bodies that are needing to enforce this, and it's not happening. Hence why I think we do need to be looking at every single person who was involved in this failure. And I think one thing that really, really grinds my gears is the fact that I think a lot of the time in these high-story buildings, it's really difficult to obtain any sort of basic information around fire safety or fire risks that building has or that they live in. I've known of so many people who've lived in high-story buildings and they don't know anything about the fire risks to do with that building. And I do wonder if that is still the case with certain buildings in this country, because it was found out that actually that cladding was used and is used in some of the buildings that exist in the UK. So it's like a huge concern.
And in the report today, obviously, multiple companies got named, called out, right? I can't remember the name of them. They've got weird niche names, but these are American companies, so it's going to involve potential extraditions. Will the US even agree to that? I can't remember the name of that young boy who got killed by the diplomat's wife when she ran him over, but that case took years just to get her here. When you think of, obviously I know these are exceptional cases, but like Julian Assange, right? How long was he able to avoid extradition because of loopholes that he used? Like, yeah, he hid in an embassy, but extraditions are extremely difficult. And it will only happen if the US agree to it. Under a Trump administration, do you think that'd happen? Do you think he'd agree to extradite these people? I don't think so. Will it even happen under a Kamala Harris one? Who knows? Obviously, we'll have to wait and see what happens. I just hope that there was articles coming out just before the live saying that the police are under massive pressure to accelerate these investigations, and they were pushing back, saying it's 1,700 pages of highly detailed information. We've got 180 officers looking into it. But I think we just need more. We just need a bit more. People need to see charges like very soon. The evidence is there for them. And hopefully we can get some justice very soon for the victims of these families.
That was literally going to be my conclusion. I just want them to have their justice. I think that's all I root for. So yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Sarah. Okay, that's the last story for the evening. Thank you all for tonight. Thank you to everyone who tuned in. Once again, I'd like to thank Sarah. Please go follow her on TikTok and watch her lives. She's probably going to go live tonight for a lovely discussion panel. But you can also support Turn Left by subscribing to us and sharing our content widely and, getting our name out there. If you like our work and you want us to become full-time, which I hope at some point soon we will, then you can support us on Patreon for £3 or £5 a month at patreon.com/turnleftmedia. We will be back this Friday at 9:30. It's 9:30. 7:30, and it won't be me because I will be on a plane at that time because I am flying away, and the show will be on time because it won't be me preparing. My name is Lewis Aaron. Thank you, and see you next time.
Patreon.com, Turn Left Media. Support independent media. Support social justice that's there on social media. Thank you, Turn Left.